Assalamu alaikum rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Good evening and welcome to Hilaal Live. We'd like to thank you, the viewer, for staying with us, and of course, my colleague Lukman Shadrack for taking you through that first 1 hour. Now, yesterday, President Cyril Ramaphosa said that government is in the process of strengthening laws against people charged with crimes related to gender-based violence. Now, one of these is to try and help domestic violence victims lodge formal complaints online. Joining us now from the Tears Foundation, I'd like to welcome Kavya Swaminathan. She is the intervention supervisor at the organization. Kavya, good evening and thank you so much for joining us. I hope I said your surname correctly.
No, you did. Thank you so much for having me.
No, it's an absolute pleasure. Okay, Kavya, realistically speaking, because when we talk of gender-based violence, it spreads across many areas where there is no Wi-Fi. This new system that President Cyril Ramaphosa is really planning on implementing, is it really feasible, given that so much of our country does not have digitization in so many areas?
I think you really hit the nail on the head, because right now we don't have enough information of how he actually plans to pilot this program. We don't know what kind of access people will have, which I think right now is leading to more questions than answers. There isn't enough access to airtime, internet, data, countrywide, so that does become an issue that even we have been querying.
Kavya, you know what is so surprising is that every time there's a Women's Day speech, we're hearing the same song and tale coming from many of the leaders, and it just feels as if the next 365 days later, there's just more and more of these crimes being committed, and everything is just a knee-jerk reaction. Is that a fair statement to mention?
No, I think that's a completely fair statement. So I think what people don't really know is that South Africa has some of the greatest our constitution is some of the greatest in world over when it comes to domestic violence and gender-based violence in general. We have a very inclusive constitution. We are great on paper. We have all these laws set out. We have all these rights and acts put out there. However, it's implementation that I think it's follow through that's been the big issue. I think it's exactly what you say, a knee-jerk reaction. We kind of sensationalize stories in the media. We talk about something for 2 weeks, and then we kind of just move on to the next thing. And I think a big part of that is that because we live in one of the crime capitals and one of the rape capitals, sorry to say, but we have become desensitized to the issue. So that also just exacerbates how we deal with it.
Kavya, just earlier on, we saw Pue, the little girl that was, of course, brutally murdered, her killer basically getting off scot-free. You can hear the cries of the family, and justifiably so, because it just feels as if it's the same old circle that is happening, where our justice system continues to work against the victims. With this new intervention that President Ramaphosa wants to bring in, I mean, does it really work? Because I want to look at who the complaints are going to be laid to. It's basically the South African Police Service. And if you have somebody who is a victim of gender-based violence going to the police station, laying the formal complaint, it's another process which drags its heels. Again, feasibility, does this really work?
Honestly, it's a really tough question, and I think it boils down to we don't know what it looks like. So right now, in practice, when it comes to applying for a protection order, it is already long-winded. That you go, you apply for a protection order, you wait 48 hours for a magistrate to make a decision. Depending on that decision, your perpetrator either gets served or they don't, and then you're given a court date. So there's a lot of steps and a lot of hoops that you have to jump through. Right now, we don't know what this online system is going to look like. We don't know if it's going to increase accessibility, what kind of turnover you're looking at. Will you be able to submit supplementary documents with your affidavits? We don't know what it looks like. But right now, it's just kind of like a thought bubble in the air. And I would like to point out that this has been promised almost 2.5 years ago. And so this has been something that has been said before. We're kind of still waiting on it. But I really don't trust the infrastructure that exists. We can barely trust a government website sometimes just to display information correctly. And to have dedicated servers and easy accessibility, it's right now, I don't know. I don't have an answer for you, but right now it doesn't look feasible. It doesn't look like we have the infrastructure to actually launch this project.
of course, the root of this and the root of creating these formats to happen, or these opportunities for victims of gender-based violence to launch complaints, rests with leaders. When you look at the leadership right now in terms of the decisions that they are making, are they in touch with what is really happening on the ground? Because again, I'll mention it. If there's a gender-based violence crime that happens, you'll see leaders going to the place, trying to soothe the community, making these promises, saying everything's going to be all right. And then 10 days later, or 2 weeks later, or a month later, another crime happens, and it's the same song and dance that happens again. Is leadership really in touch on the ground of what is actually happening right now?
I think there is a distance between legislation and laws that are being passed versus what's actually happening on the ground level. And I think another big issue is that I think what we tend to do is that we will focus on one aspect. So we will say, okay, we need justice reform, or we need police reform, or we need social sectors to provide more input. But what we actually need to be looking at is in a far more holistic sense. Justice reform doesn't matter or doesn't mean anything if police officers still don't have sensitivity training when people walk into their stations. The same way you can train a police officer as much as you want, but if you don't look at the justice system and how they act towards clients and how our laws work, it doesn't really work. So there's a lot of moving parts that we need to kind of get moving in the same direction and actually to see something like meaningful being done.
Kavya, yesterday, Women's Day was celebrated, and I feel it's only right that we honor the women of before, who of course stood up against so much of injustices towards females. Even now, females are being isolated or being subjugated to so much of biasness. And added to that, you have, of course, gender-based violence. I ask you this as being part of the Tears Foundation and somebody who works really close with trauma and so much more. If the gender-based violence is not sorted out, if we are not able to sort it out holistically and from also the inside, then does Women's Day still have a meaningful purpose for us as South Africans?
I think I think it does. I mean, we still, it's sad that we still need to have an allocated day to remind people that women are important. And it would be great if people just remember that 365 days a year. However, I think it doesn't take away from the fact that work has been done. I think sometimes we focus so much in the negative, we don't see the strides that have happened. So I think change has happened, and we can see change happening slowly. And even as a part of our organization, I think it is a long-standing problem. It's something that's so prevalent. It's not going to happen overnight. But change is happening slowly but surely. Things are happening. We're talking about it more. The fact that we can have an open conversation, like talk about government implementations, talk about societal norms, is a big change. I mean, you couldn't do that 30, 40 years ago. You would just be silenced. It wouldn't be a topic of importance. So that just shows that things are changing. They're doing slowly. We'd like it to move much faster, but I think change is inevitable because something will break otherwise.
Before we close this conversation, Kavya, of course, you're being part of Tears Foundation. It's one of those NGOs that are working very closely with victims of domestic violence and gender-based violence. When dealing with them on a daily basis or on a weekly basis, how far are we from really making sure that we can eradicate the scourge? Are we still a long way to go? And what do we as normal citizens, especially us as men, need to play in order to have a role in cutting off the scourge that continues to hurt our women?
I think it's all about access to information and holding people accountable. So when it comes to access, I think we need to be having more realistic conversations about what's happening. We need to be open. We need to be educating our children. We need to be not scaring them, but talking to them about the realities of what's happening. And then it comes to accountability. We need to be holding people accountable for their actions. So if you ask me as men, what you should be doing is hold your friends accountable. Like call them out for the jokes that they make, for the things that they say, have open conversations. I think a lot of the times men feel like this is not a space where they belong because they are seen as the perpetrators. However, in order for us to make meaningful change, everyone needs to come to the table.
Kavya, we'd like to say thank you so much for joining us here on Hilaal Live.
Thank you so much for having me.
No, it's an absolute pleasure. Kavya Swaminathan from the Tears Foundation. It's interesting to see what's going to happen now with regards to this new digitization of lodging complaints to get protection orders against suspects of gender-based violence. Maybe it works, maybe it doesn't, but with the way digitization is across the country, or the lack of it, it's going to be really difficult for those victims of gender-based violence to just go ahead, log a complaint, and all will be sorted. After the break, I'll be speaking to Sheikh Irfan Abrahams from the MJC. They were part of a band of religious leaders that got together to try and find a resolution to the current taxi strike crisis that is happening in Cape Town. We'll hear from him after the break.